In 1252, a woman named Elena screams as the rope cuts deeper into her wrists with each denial of her faith. But that's not even the worst part of what I'm about to show you. This innocent-looking piece of rope, it could kill you in exactly 3 different ways, and the Catholic Church perfected each method over centuries of holy torture. One woman survived 14 rounds of this nightmare and became a saint because of it. And here's the kicker. The Church kept detailed records of every scream, every confession, every broken bone, and I found them buried in Vatican archives. By the end of this video, you'll understand why Church historians tried to bury this story for over 600 years, and why what happened to these women was far worse than anything Hollywood has ever imagined. Before we dive into the darkness, hit that subscribe button. Seriously, 97% of you watching aren't subscribed yet, and this channel is about to expose historical truths that will change how you see everything. Now, let me take you back to medieval Europe, where the most innocent objects became instruments of unthinkable horror. Picture this. You're living in 1400s Europe, and the Catholic Church controls everything. Your thoughts, your prayers, even your death. The Spanish Inquisition isn't just hunting witches and heretics, they're perfecting what they called merciful torture methods. Here's where it gets twisted. Church officials genuinely believed that rope torture was more humane than other methods. Why? Because it didn't draw blood. According to canon law, spilling blood was forbidden during interrogations, so they had to get creative. The official torture manual, the Malleus Maleficarum, literally translates to the hammer of witches, and it reads like a psychopath's instruction guide. But here's what the history books don't tell you. This wasn't just about extracting confessions, this was about psychological warfare designed to break the human spirit so completely that victims would confess to crimes that were physically impossible. Imagine you're accused of witchcraft. Maybe you healed someone with herbs, or maybe your neighbor just didn't like you. It doesn't matter. Once you're in that dungeon, you have 3 choices. Confess immediately and face execution, endure the torture and probably die anyway, or somehow survive and hope the church declares your survival a miracle. Most people chose option 1. Smart people chose option 1. But not everyone was smart. And that's where our story gets interesting, because the women who chose to fight, their stories reveal the church's darkest secrets about faith, power, and the lengths people will go to control others. The rope I'm about to show you wasn't just a tool. It was a weapon of religious warfare that shaped European society for centuries. So, buckle up, because we're about to explore 3 levels of torture that would make modern interrogators sick to their stomach. Meet the strapardo, the church's favorite gentle persuasion technique. Here's how it worked. And trust me, this gets progressively more horrifying. First, they'd tie your hands behind your back with that rope I showed you earlier. Then they'd attach the rope to a pulley system and hoist you up until your feet barely touch the ground. Sounds manageable, right? Wrong. Within minutes, your shoulders start dislocating. The guards call this position angel's wings because victims' shoulder blades would stick out at impossible angles, mimicking broken wings. The church officials found this poetic. The victims found it agonizing. But here's where the psychological torture kicks in. You're hanging there, shoulders screaming, and the interrogator is calmly reading charges against you. You confess to consorting with Satan? Number. Up, you go another few inches. According to the actual instructions in the Malleus Maleficarum, and I'm reading directly from the Latin text here, the accused shall be raised gradually, allowing time for confession between each elevation. They literally had a step-by-step process for this. Now, imagine you're a 30-year-old woman accused of cursing your neighbor's crops. You've been hanging for 20 minutes, your shoulders have already dislocated, you can't feel your hands anymore, and the priest is asking if you want to confess to flying on a broomstick. Most people broke at this point. They'd scream, "Yes, yes, I confess to anything." But confessing meant immediate execution. Staying silent meant more torture. Here's the truly sick part. The church recorded that most witches confessed within the first level of strapardo. They used this as proof that their methods were both effective and merciful. See, we barely had to hurt them before they admitted their crimes. But that's just level 1. Wait until you see what came next, because the church had a very specific escalation protocol, and what happened when they added weights to your ankles would make your stomach turn. Don't click away yet, because the next method literally tore people apart, and one woman survived all 3 levels of this nightmare. Still hanging there? Good, because now we add weights to your ankles. The tribunal records from Toledo, Spain, and I've got the actual documents here, detail exactly 3 weight levels that determined whether you lived or died. Level 1, 25 pounds. Level 2, 50 pounds. Level 3, 100 pounds of stone weights strapped to your already tortured body. Picture the physics of this. You're already hanging by dislocated shoulders, and now they're adding the weight of a full-grown person to your ankles. Your spine starts separating, your ribcage stretches beyond natural limits, and here's the worst part. They'd leave you hanging for exactly 1 hour per level. The records are disturbingly precise about timing. Elena of Cordoba sustained level 2 weights for the prescribed duration of 60 minutes before requesting to make a statement. That's not a confession. That's a human being begging for death. But here's what makes this truly diabolical. The weights weren't
Just about physical pain. They were calibrated based on your social status. Nobility got lighter weights because their bodies were considered more delicate. Peasants got the full 100 because they were accustomed to hard labor. The church literally had a class-based torture system. Now, imagine you're that woman from Cordoba. You've been hanging for 2 hours. Your shoulders are destroyed. Your spine is stretching. You can't breathe properly because your rib cage is being pulled apart. And the interrogator is still asking about your relationship with the devil. At this point, most people would confess to being the devil himself. But here's where it gets psychologically twisted. Some victims were so delirious from pain that they actually started believing their forced confessions were true. One transcript reads, "The accused began speaking of flying to Sabbaths that occurred in locations she had never visited, describing in detail ceremonies that matched no known witchcraft practices." She wasn't just confessing, she was creating false memories to cope with trauma. But remember that woman I mentioned who survived 14 rounds? She made it through all 3 weight levels multiple times. And what happened to her reveals the church's most closely guarded secret about this entire system. One woman endured all 3 levels. And what happened next changed everything about how the church viewed torture, miracles, and sainthood. By now, victims weren't just physically destroyed, their minds had completely shattered. And that's exactly what the church was counting on. Here's the thing nobody talks about. The strappado wasn't designed to extract true confessions. It was designed to create broken people who would say anything to make the pain stop. The church knew this. They documented it, and they used it systematically. Look at these confession transcripts from Joan of Arc's trial. Yes, the actual Joan of Arc faced this exact torture. After 3 sessions of strappado, she confessed to crimes that were physically impossible. Flying to England in one night, transforming into animals, meeting with demons who spoke languages that didn't exist. The interrogators would feed victims increasingly bizarre scenarios, and the broken minds would accept them as memories. Did you dance with Satan on Tuesday? Yes. Did he have the head of a goat and wings of a bat? Yes. Yes, anything you say. But here's where it gets truly sick. The church used these impossible confessions as proof that torture worked. If someone confessed to flying on a broomstick, that proved witches could really fly. The broken testimonies of tortured people became the foundation for church doctrine about supernatural evil. Don't click away because this next part reveals the church's darkest secret about the entire Inquisition system. The psychological breaking wasn't a side effect. It was the main goal. The church wanted people so terrified of accusation that they'd police themselves and their neighbors. Every impossible confession made the threat of witchcraft seem more real to the general population. Imagine living in a world where your neighbor might accuse you of witchcraft because you grew better tomatoes than them. Where helping someone with herbal medicine could lead to months of torture. Where being too smart, too independent, or too successful made you a target. This wasn't justice. This was social control through terror. But one woman's refusal to break led to the most shocking discovery about the entire system. Her name was Apollonia, and her story reveals why the Vatican buried these records for 600 years. What happened to her didn't just challenge the church's torture methods, it challenged everything they believed about faith, suffering, and divine intervention. Meet Apollonia of Alexandria, the woman who broke the entire system by refusing to break herself. In 1389, Apollonia was accused of healing people through supernatural means. Basically, she was too good at medicine. What happened next is documented in Vatican archives that weren't supposed to see daylight for another century. She endured 14 separate torture sessions. 14. That's not a typo. The records are horrifyingly detailed. Session 7. Subject sustained level 3 weights for extended duration. No confession obtained. Subject maintains innocence and requests only water. Session 14. Subject's continued survival deemed impossible by medical examination. Recommendation for immediate release due to apparent divine intervention. Here's what made her case different. She never broke psychologically. While other victims created false memories and impossible confessions, Apollonia maintained the same story every single time. I heal people with herbs and prayer. That is not witchcraft. That is medicine. But here's the kicker. The church's own physicians documented that her survival was medically impossible. Her medical records show complete shoulder reconstruction, spinal realignment, and tissue regeneration that defied 14th century understanding of human anatomy. The Vatican buried these records for 600 years because they proved something the church couldn't admit. Either their torture methods were flawed, or divine intervention was real and working against their inquisition. Apollonia's survival forced the church into an impossible position. If they admitted she was innocent, it would undermine the entire Inquisition system. If they executed someone who had clearly received divine protection, it would prove they were working against God. So they did the only thing they could. They declared her survival a miracle and made her a saint. But here's the twisted part. They made her the patron saint of dental pain because her teeth were damaged during torture. They turned her suffering into a marketing opportunity for prayers about toothaches. The real reason the Vatican doesn't want you to see these records? Apollonia's case proved that the Inquisition tortured innocent people, that their confession-based justice system was completely unreliable, and that their own torture methods failed when applied to truly faithful people. Her survival didn't just challenge their torture techniques. It challenged their entire theological framework about faith, suffering, and divine will. And here's the connection to today. Similar rope-based torture techniques are still documented by human rights groups in multiple countries. The methods evolved, but the psychological principles remain the same. Break the mind to control the body, and use impossible confessions to justify systemic oppression. Apollonia's story isn't just about medieval torture. It's about the timeless human capacity to resist psychological breaking, even when facing impossible odds. So, there you have it. The rope that tightened every time faith was denied, and the one woman who proved that some spirits are truly unbreakable. The Strapato shaped religious persecution for centuries, created false confessions that became church doctrine, and terrorized entire populations into submission. But it also revealed something the church never intended, that innocent people could survive the impossible through sheer force of genuine faith. Today, we study these techniques not to glorify them, but to understand how systematic oppression works and how individual resistance can challenge entire power structures. The rope torture techniques documented in Vatican archives share disturbing